Chapter 1. The Girl with the Locked Door. In the small coastal town of Puerto Celeste, surrounded by high cliffs and choppy waters, there was a faded blue house that everyone knew but few approached. There lived Doña Emilia, a respected and feared woman, known for her strictness and the family business she ruled with an iron fist. Owner of a small fishing and shipping empire, her word was law, both in the port and at home. Emilia had a daughter, Isabella, the result of a turbulent relationship with a man who disappeared at sea before the girl was even born. From the beginning, Emilia saw her daughter not as a blessing, but as a mistake that reminded her daily of the fragility she had sworn never to show. Isabella grew up in silence, not with a lack of food or shelter, but with an absence of love. Affection was rationed, hugs non-existent, and her mother's eyes, always cold, never returned a single look of tenderness. While the other children played on the sand, Isabella stood behind the curtains of the blue house watching. She was never allowed downstairs without permission. She grew up listening to the voices of the servants, the whispers of visitors, and the curt orders Emilia threw like stones. When she tried to approach, her mother looked away. When she asked for something, she received silence in response. The only thing she owned was an old notebook, where she wrote stories about what her life would be like away from here, a life where she would be loved, respected, and, above all, free. At 16, during a dawn when the winds beat against the windows like furious ghosts, Isabella packed a suitcase and fled. He left behind a simple note: "I'm not coming back, but one day you'll see me again." Emilia found the note but didn't cry. She simply burned it in the fireplace, as if erasing her daughter's existence there. Little by little she began telling the town that Isabella had died. "Of heartbreak," she said theatrically, as if she were the victim of abandonment. Time passed. Years passed like waves crashing on the same beach Isabella never set foot on. The city had changed little. Emilia's name was still influential, but age was taking its toll. Her once steadfast empire was beginning to crumble with technological advances and the arrival of new entrepreneurs in the region. And it was then, on a clear morning, that a luxury black car parked in front of the blue house. The neighborhood windows opened. Curious faces peered through the curtains. From there emerged an imposing woman, dressed with understated elegance, with a firm posture and a penetrating gaze. There was no doubt. It was Isabella. But not the fragile girl she once was. She was now a woman made of steel and scars. She brought with her something more than financial power. She brought truths the city had buried, and she was willing to reopen all the doors that had once closed to her, starting with the one at the Blue House. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel now. And leave a like. This helps us continue bringing you exciting stories like this, full of twists and turns and poetic justice. Chapter 2. The Return That Frozen the City. Isabella's presence in Puerto Celeste spread faster than the coastal winds. Within hours, her name was already being whispered in bakeries, at fishermen's domino tables, and among the customers at Doña Marina's salon. Everyone remembered the quiet girl from the Blue House, Doña Emilia's disowned daughter, the one who supposedly had died of sadness. But there she was, alive, radiant, elegant, and with a sparkle in her eyes that disturbed those who never believed she would return. She dressed with refined discretion, wore imported shoes, and carried a handbag with gold initials. She didn't flaunt it, but she didn't need to. Her very walk, firm and serene, made an impact. Each step was a silent message. She had won. Doña Emilia, upon seeing the black car parked in front of her house, froze in front of the second-story window. She recognized her daughter immediately, even after so many years. The blood, though despised, screamed. Her hand trembled over her teacup, and for the first time in decades, fear ran down her spine like an unwanted shiver. It wasn't fear of the woman herself, but of what she carried, because Isabella didn't just bring money. She brought memory, and memory, when uncontrollable, becomes a weapon. The doorbell rang, but no one answered. Isabella didn't insist. Instead, she turned around and walked through the town, making herself visible. She visited the old school, now in ruins. She passed the square where she had never been able to play. And finally, she entered the Alencar family's old colonial mansion, now converted into a luxury boutique hotel. She had purchased it herself, without anyone's knowledge. It was from there that she would coordinate her movements. She settled into the master suite, overlooking the sea she had so often dreamed of crossing. From there, she began making calls, scheduling appointments, gathering documents, and convening discreet meetings with the city's established business leaders. The name Isabella Ramos reappeared in contracts, investment proposals, and land and stock purchase records. Under cover of darkness, she hired lawyers specializing in estates and inheritance, because yes, she had been informally disinherited, but never officially. And there was evidence kept by a former employee of the Blue House who secretly kept letters written by Emilia at the time of her escape. They contained an implicit confession of rejection and denial by her daughter, documents that now carried legal weight. The city watched in silence, wide-eyed. Some admired her, others feared her, but no one dared to confront her. Isabella, however, wasn't driven by impulsive revenge. She was methodical, strategic. She knew that true justice didn't come with shouting or scandals, but with presence and positioning. And she had become an expert at this. On the 7th day of her stay, she sent a letter to the Blue House, handwritten in the same handwriting Emilia had rejected as a child. Inside, just one sentence: "I am at peace, but the past needs to be resolved." Chapter 3. The Truth That Slept at the Bottom of the Sea. The envelope with Isabella's handwriting sat untouched on the wooden table in the living room for almost 2 days. Doña Emilia didn't touch it. I watched it from afar, as if it were a poisonous animal. The paper carried more than ink. It carried everything she had buried for decades, what she pretended to forget, what she forged as truth, and what she killed within herself to maintain her reputation. Inside the Blue House, Emilia paced in circles. Her rigid, always made-up face now showed the lines of time and stress. She was no longer the unbeatable woman of the port. Her business dealings were fragile. Her allies were scarce, and the modern world had rendered irrelevant the power she once commanded. With a simple order. Meanwhile, from the top of the Colonial Hotel, Isabella watched the city's activity like someone observing an old chessboard. Every conversation, every expression on the street, every refusal to respond to her attempts at contact, everything fueled her conviction. There was no turning back. What held her there was no longer a desire for affection. It was emotional justice, and she would not return to the capital until the past had been properly confronted. It was during one of these sleepless nights, while rummaging through old files inherited from a deceased lawyer, a man who had secretly helped build her empire, that Isabella found a forgotten document, a copy of the logbook of the ship Santa Lucia, the vessel that sank 30 years earlier, claiming the life of the father she never knew. The report contained contradictions. According to it, Emilia had been at the dock on the day of departure, despite always claiming she hadn't seen the man since before her pregnancy. From there, Isabella followed the trail left by those who didn't want to be remembered. She discovered old Coast Guard records, witness accounts that mentioned arguments between Emilia and a simple-looking man with dark hair and a foreign accent. She also discovered that this man, Miguel, had tried to admit paternity but had been prevented by someone with influence. The truth was beginning to emerge, like a ghost ship breaking through the fog. Emilia hadn't rejected her daughter out of shame. About the pregnancy, she had rejected her out of hatred for her father. Miguel had fallen in love with her at a time when Emilia was still young, vulnerable, and passionate. But he was poor, and above all, free. Too free for the world she sought to dominate. When she became pregnant, Emilia tried to hide it. Miguel, upon finding out, wanted to come clean, but she accused him of opportunism, of trying to get close to her out of self-interest. When he decided to leave to work and save money for his daughter's future, Emilia mobilized her contacts to prevent him from returning, and when the ship sank on the high seas, she buried everything with it, including her humanity. Isabella, reading all these records, felt a silence invade her chest. The pain of rejection now took on deeper contours. She had never been hated for who she was, but for remembering someone her mother would rather erase. Isabella's notebook filled that night with a new plan, not one of revenge, but of dismantling. She wouldn't destroy Emilia with hatred. She would force her to see herself for the first time. The next day, he sent his mother not just another letter, but a court summons. He contested the family's inventory, demanded recognition of his legitimate parentage, and publicly requested the opening of the estate of Miguel Torres, who had disappeared at sea under dubious circumstances. Puerto Celeste woke up in shock. The rejected heiress had returned, but now she was the wind that no one could contain. Chapter 4. Voices that have never been heard. The news spread like wildfire through the alleys, markets, and offices of Puerto Celeste. Isabella Ramos had taken legal action to be recognized as the legitimate heir of the man everyone believed to be just a shadow in her story. Miguel Torres, the man who disappeared at sea, the name Doña Emilia never spoke. The town, once accustomed to the silent order imposed by the matriarch, was now divided. Some sided with Emilia out of respect for the past. Others, younger, saw Isabella as a symbol of buried truth. But one thing was certain: no one could ignore what was happening. The reopening of Miguel's estate wasn't just a legal move. It was a historic breakthrough. Forgotten documents resurfaced, old names were revisited, and witnesses who had previously feared speaking out now found the courage to speak out in Isabella's presence. One of these names was Don Silvino, a former sailor who had served alongside Miguel and who, at the time of the shipwreck, had been mysteriously dismissed from his duty. He lived in seclusion in a wooden house by the river, discredited by everyone, labeled a drunkard and a liar. But Isabella went to him. He found a man with a hoarse voice, calloused hands, and eyes clouded with tears from time. He showed him an old photo of his father. Silvino held the image with trembling fingers. "He was the best of us," he said, after a long silence. Silvino recounted that the night before his final departure, Miguel had been seen arguing with two men sent by someone from above, in his words. They talked about threats, about giving up on trying to get with the rich girl. The next day, Miguel left and never returned. The official story said the ship sank because of a sudden storm. But Silvino revealed something never before mentioned. The Santa Lucia should never have set sail that day. Forecasts warned of strong winds. The captain had refused to postpone, and the reason for the rush came from the port direct orders, signed by Emilia Ramos herself. With this new testimony, Isabella expanded her lawsuit. Now it wasn't just an inheritance dispute, it was an investigation into willful negligence. She demanded recognition of Emilia's responsibility in her father's death and the right to memory that had been denied her. In the Blue House, the old matriarch was more silent than ever. She didn't go out, didn't receive visitors, didn't respond to the press. The blinds were always closed, and the name Isabella echoed through the hallways like a reborn ghost. Her once loyal allies now hesitated. Her lawyers, under pressure, asked for more time, and the city no longer looked at Emilia with reverence. Every day, more records, letters, newspaper clippings and forgotten invoices were gathered in the lawsuit. Isabella acted not with fury, but with precision. She didn't seek emotional revenge. She sought historical restoration. And at the end of the week, he published an open statement in the local newspaper. "I don't want destruction. I want truth. My story was erased for convenience, but I'm here, whole, alive, and nothing will silence me." If this story touches you and you want to see justice happen, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us continue sharing stories that move and make you think. Chapter 5. The Weight of the Name and the Fall of the Wall. The city of Puerto Celeste, once marked by a predictable routine of boats, sun, and cafes, now lived. According to a single name, Isabella Ramos, the case that had begun as a supposed family dispute now dominated public opinion and the corridors of the municipal courthouse. The city had never witnessed anything like it. Doña Emilia's empire, which had once seemed untouchable, now trembled, not from direct attacks, but from trials and courage accumulated over a forgotten life. With each new witness, each document exposed, Emilia's past became less mythical and more concrete. The portrait the town had painted of her as a strong, just, and proud woman began to fade. She proved herself to be a ruthless figure, willing to shed her own blood to keep intact a reputation built on fear and silence. At the Blue House, doors that had previously been open to local politicians and business people were now closed. Visitors were rare. Even the staff, many with decades of service, began discreetly resigning. Emilia, accustomed to giving orders, was now an island surrounded by shadows and regrets she couldn't name. Isabella, for her part, remained calm. Even with the mounting media pressure and the rumors circulating around town, she didn't stray. All her actions were carefully planned. But inside her, a battle intensified. The desire for justice began to clash with the pain of unspoken rejection. After all, despite having exposed everything, her mother remained completely silent. No letter, no attempt at conversation, no regrets. But silence also speaks. And in Isabella's soul, that sounded like confirmation that she would never have what she always wanted, a simple human recognition of love. The court then announced that the case would have its first preliminary hearing at the end of the month. Everyone knew there would be no turning back from that point on. The judge in charge was known for his technical rigor and aversion to politics. If Isabella's evidence were indeed real, as it appeared to be, Emilia would lose everything, including the name she used as armor. Shortly before the hearing, something unexpected happened. An anonymous envelope was left at the reception of the hotel where Isabella was staying. Inside, there were no threats, no legal documents, just a single old black-and-white photograph marked by time, a young Emilia smiling with Miguel holding a child in his arms. It was her, Isabella. On the back, a handwritten sentence in a firm, bitter handwriting. "Sometimes, loving is knowing how to destroy what could destroy us first." Isabella held the photo. For long minutes, her throat tightened. It wasn't a confession, nor a plea for forgiveness. It was a portrait of the reason she'd been rejected. Fear. Fear of loving and losing. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of repeating her own past. And in that moment, Isabella understood. She no longer needed her mother's voice. She no longer needed a hug that would never come. She had already won, not by returning rich, but by not returning destroyed. Still, judgment would come, and there, before the law, and the entire city. Emilia would have to, for the first time, look her daughter in the eyes. Chapter 6. The day. Everyone stopped to stare. On the morning of the hearing, Puerto Celeste seemed to breathe more slowly. The streets, usually bustling with the comings and goings of fishermen and tourists, were eerily quiet. There was a dense air hanging over the city, as if something ancient was about to crumble before everyone's eyes. The municipal courthouse, an imposing building with colonial columns and arched windows, was already surrounded by onlookers even before the gates opened. Regional newspapers, radio reporters, and even discreet cameras mingled among the residents. Everyone wanted to witness what many called the trial of the century, not for its legal value, but for the symbolic weight it carried, the disowned daughter against her powerful mother. Isabella arrived punctually. She wore a white suit, no jewelry, no flashy makeup, just presence. Her posture was serene, but her eyes carried the intensity of a soul that had carried more than its share for too long. Behind her, lawyers, advisors, and discreet allies. No one spoke. No one needed to. Across the room, Doña Emilia entered, accompanied by a single lawyer. She was visibly older than she had been weeks ago. Her skin was lined, her eyes dull. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't seen as invincible. But still, she walked with what remained of her pride. When her eyes met Isabella's, there was not a nod, reaction, not a look away. Just a second, frozen in time, in which they both knew they were facing the end of a story that began long before their daughter's birth. The judge, a firm woman of few words, opened the hearing objectively. Isabella presented the documentation, the letter from Sailor Silvino, the expert report confirming that Miguel's boarding orders were issued under duress, the burned letters saved by a former employee, the original birth certificate with the father's name omitted, the photograph left anonymously, and finally Miguel's diary, recovered by an antique dealer, containing accounts of his love for Emilia and his dream of raising their daughter together. Emilia presented no evidence, no emotional defense. Her lawyers clung to technical arguments, such as the lack of official paternity records, but their tone was fragile, insecure. The judge, unfazed, simply listened. At the end of the session, the most anticipated moment arrived. Isabella asked to speak, and, before everyone, she spoke not with rancor but with truth. "I'm not here for the money nor for revenge. I'm here because for many years I was a hidden story, a child locked in a room, a woman denied by her own origins. Today, I am who I am, and I'm proud of it. But I didn't come just for myself. I came for all the voices that were silenced for convenience's sake. I came for Miguel, and I came for the girl who once dreamed of a hug that never came." In the room, no one was breathing. Emilia, sitting, didn't say a word, but a gleam appeared in her eyes, not of tears but of weariness. For the first time, she seemed to recognize what she had done. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but she didn't deny it anymore. The judge closed the session by announcing that the verdict would be given in 3 days, but everyone there already knew the truth had already won. Isabella left the courtroom as she had entered, without ostentation. But that day, she wasn't just rich or powerful. She was whole. Chapter 7. The name that was never said. The 3 days between the hearing and the verdict felt like an eternity in Puerto Celeste. The town was in suspense. Businesses opened late, churches were fuller, and local radio stations were talking about nothing else. The residents, torn between the weight of tradition and the force of truth, waited as if something much bigger were about to happen. Isabella, however, wasn't waiting anxiously. She spent her days in silence, secluded in her suite at the Colonial Hotel. She didn't attend meetings, didn't read the newspapers, didn't respond to messages. She walked around her room as if conversing with ghosts. She didn't fear them, she simply recognized that they still lived within her. One of those nights, rummaging through the box of documents, he found something he'd forgotten. An old, linen-covered notebook that belonged to his father, Miguel. It was a travel journal, where he'd recorded every port he visited, every thought the sea brought him. And there on the last page was something unexpected, a letter never sent, addressed to Emilia. "I know you're scared. I know I was the mistake you couldn't show the world. But if one day our daughter grows up and looks at you with the same eyes they once looked at me, I hope you have the courage not to run away." Isabella read those words with tears in her eyes. For the first time, she felt her father's presence as something real. Miguel, who had always been an absence, was now a voice, and that voice said, "You don't need acceptance, you are enough." Meanwhile, in the Blue House, Doña Emilia spent the same days without allowing anyone in. She refused to let the maid in, turned off the phone, and paced the house as if every wall were a distorted mirror. For the first time, she was alone, truly alone, without allies, without control, without applause, and, most of all, without excuses. She knew the court would rule in her daughter's favor, but it wasn't the money that kept her awake at night. It was the knowledge that everything she had built, every business, every public donation, every distinguished citizen award, couldn't erase the fact that she had denied her own daughter to preserve herself. On the third day, the courthouse filled up again. The courtroom was packed. The windows were open to let in the sea breeze, as if even the ocean wanted to hear. The judge entered, direct, serene. After a thorough analysis of the documents, testimonies, historical and legal records, this court recognizes Mrs. Isabella Ramos Torres as the legitimate daughter of Miguel Torres, a natural heir of all the rights and memories that were denied to her. The full name, said there, out loud, in public, Torres, the name of the father who was never recognized. Isabella closed her eyes for a brief moment. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just took a deep breath, like someone finally filling their lungs with clean air after a long journey through murky waters. Emilia, sitting on the other side, didn't get up, but for the first time she looked at her daughter with an unmasked gaze. And in that moment, brief, silent, something was said, not with words, but with presence. It wasn't forgiveness, but perhaps it was surrender. Chapter 8. What builds after the storm. The ruling handed down in the Puerto Celeste courthouse not only settled a legal dispute, it redefined the city's history. For the first time, a name that had been buried was brought back to light with strength and dignity. Miguel Torres, the missing man, the forgotten man, was now part of the official records as the legitimate father. And Isabella, the rejected daughter, now publicly carried a surname that had been denied her, but that had always existed in her soul. The impact of the decision was immediate. Newspapers across the state covered the case. Universities and civil rights groups began using the story as an example of memory recovery and emotional justice. And the city, previously held hostage by an imposed legacy, began to look at itself differently. Isabella, however, didn't celebrate as a winner. Her victory wasn't marked by applause, but by silence. And it was in that silence that she decided what she would do next. He began by purchasing one of the port's abandoned buildings, a former net and hook warehouse left to decay since the modernization of industrial fishing. There, without much fanfare, he established the project he'd been dreaming of since reclaiming its history. The Miguel Torres Institute, a cultural and educational center for rejected children, young orphans, abandoned women, and people in need of a starting point. The institute wasn't charity. It was reparation. It was a voice. And its opening attracted dozens of city residents, many of whom had never set foot in a cultural center. Children played in the hallways, reading workshops were held, and on the walls, alongside colorful paintings, hung a simple portrait of Miguel smiling, an image restored by a local artist from fragmented photographs. Across town, the Blue House still stood, but silent. Doña Emilia had not appeared in public since the day of the verdict. It was said she refused visitors, spending her days sitting at the second-story window, staring at the sea she had so often tried to forget. One day, however, one of the Institute's volunteers showed up with an envelope. It had been discreetly left at the reception desk. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, written in Emilia's firm, sober handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I read his diary, and for a moment I wished I had done everything differently." Isabella read in silence. She didn't respond. She held no grudge. She simply walked to the Institute's balcony and gazed at the sea. The same sea that had taken her father, the same sea that had separated her from her mother, and the same sea that now reflected the light of a new era. She didn't need anything else. Because the woman who had returned was not the girl at the window, she was now the beacon that other girls would look to when they felt lost. Chapter 9. Where Flowers Grow on Ashes. With the Miguel Torres Institute fully operational, Puerto Celeste began to experience a slow and silent transformation, not through laws or decrees, but through example. Children who once roamed the streets now attended music, drawing, and literacy workshops. Single mothers found psychological and legal support. Aimless young people discovered new ways of living through books and screens, and at the center of it all, without ostentation, was Isabella. She refused tributes. When a school suggested erecting a statue of her on the pier, she responded gently but firmly, "Monuments don't feed, they don't educate, they don't listen." Her face, however, was present in the words of the city's women, in the gestures of teenagers who shared her stories, in the eyes of children who began to dream of the future. But while the city flourished, echoes of the past still whispered in certain corners. On a hot summer afternoon, a grey-haired woman with a stooped posture appeared discreetly at the Institute's gate. She wore a simple dress and carried a small, weathered wooden box. It was Lucrecia, Isabella's former wet nurse, dismissed by Emilia when the girl was just 4 years old, precisely because she was too affectionate. Lucrecia had been expelled without warning, without explanation, and she never again learned what had happened to the girl she secretly called her daughter. Upon meeting Isabella again, they both remained silent for long minutes. They didn't hug. They recognized each other. Lucrecia handed over the box with trembling hands. Inside were objects she had kept for all those years, a broken bracelet bearing the name Isa, a yellowed photograph of the child sitting on her lap, and a handwritten note from Miguel, never delivered, in which he said, "If you ever care for her, tell her I fought for her, and that my love would cross any distance." Isabella held the bracelet as if she were holding her own as a child. The memory she had missed was there, in the arms of a woman who wasn't her mother, but who had loved her as such. Lucrecia began living behind the Institute, helping in the workshops and telling stories to the children. The town, which had previously only known the surname Ramos, now recognized the power of the Torres name. On the other side, the Blue House remained silent. But one detail caught my attention. The windows on the second floor began to open every morning. No one saw Emilia leave, but the simple fact that the curtains parted seemed to indicate something. A sign, perhaps of surrender, perhaps of longing, perhaps of humanity. Isabella never knocked on that door. She never sent another letter. She didn't need to. Her victory was not her mother's condemnation. It was her own liberation, and on that same balcony where she had so often dreamed of. Escape, now other girls dreamed, but not of escape, of permanence, of courage, of a future. Chapter 10. When Pain Becomes Root. Time passed as it only does in small towns, slowly but without forgetting. Isabella Ramos. Torres's name was no longer just a headline, it was a landmark. The Miguel Torres Institute expanded to other coastal cities, bringing with it the philosophy born of pain. No one needs to be born loved to become love. In Puerto Celeste, children who were once shadows now laughed in. The halls of the Institute. Young people who had previously been discredited began teaching classes, coordinating projects, guiding others with the same hand that was once denied them. The city didn't change because it wanted to. It changed because it saw it was possible. Lucretia, now elderly, became a living legend. She was seen as the guardian of the place. She told stories that blended truth and enchantment, teaching how to sow dreams and heal hurts with thread and patience. And in her eyes, as she looked at Isabella, there was a pride that not even blood could generate. Isabella, for her part, aged unhurriedly, without masks, without guilt. She didn't seek recognition, she cultivated peace. She could be seen in the squares with the children, in conversation circles, at community lunches, always with the same serene demeanor of someone who had triumphed without needing to crush anyone. But there was something the city still waited for. The final reunion. The blue house remained there. Intact, ancient, firm as a fortress, and just as lonely. No one saw Emilia, but everyone knew she was alive. The windows continued to open every morning, and on certain afternoons, instrumental music would escape through the cracks, an old vinyl record that only she could hear. It was on any given Sunday, without announcement, without fanfare, that something happened. Isabella appeared, walking alone down the town's main street. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back, and a notebook in her hands. She stopped in front of the blue house, looked at the door, and for the first time in decades, knocked. The city held its breath. No one knew what was said inside. No one heard screams, no crying, no words. But an hour later, Isabella emerged from the house, her face serene, her eyes moist. She said nothing. She simply walked to the beach, took off her shoes, and stepped onto the sand for the first time since she was a child. He sat by the sea and wrote a sentence in his notebook. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come with asking, it comes with presence. The next day, Emilia didn't open the windows anymore. 2 weeks later, she died quietly in her armchair, facing the sea. She left no will, no fortune. She left only an envelope addressed to Isabella. Inside, an old photograph of the two of them, still in the first months of her daughter's life. And behind the image, a few words, written with effort. You were my mistake and my punishment, but also my redemption. Isabella didn't cry. She simply walked to the Institute, placed the photo on the wall next to her father's portrait, and went out into the courtyard. The wind was strong that day. Children ran about, and among them, a dark-eyed girl clutched the broken bracelet Isabella had worn as a child, now restored and gleaming. The story didn't end there. It began again. Because some pains cannot be overcome, but they are transformed into ground, into shelter, into roots.